The My daughter was 9 years old. I want you to hold that number before anything else in this story. 9. The age of loose teeth and strong opinions about which flavor of ice cream is objectively superior, and the unself-conscious joy of a child who has not yet learned that the world sometimes requires armor. She was 9 years old, standing in the living room of my parents' house in the blue dress she had chosen herself that morning. The one with the small yellow flowers that she had picked out at the store 3 weeks earlier, with the focused deliberation of a child who understands that clothing is a form of self-expression. Performing a dance she had been rehearsing for 6 weeks for the family gathering. She had worked on that dance every evening after dinner. I had watched her practice it 41 times. I know because she had asked me to count. She stood in the center of the living room, and she danced. And when she finished, when the music stopped, and she stood with her arms out in the ending pose, breathing hard, eyes bright, the specific radiance of a child who has given something everything she had. My father started laughing. Not the warm, delighted laugh of a grandfather watching his granddaughter perform, the other kind, the kind that has a target. My mother joined him. And then my aunt, and then my cousin Marcus, who was 17, and had always followed whoever was laughing loudest. 4 people laughing at a 9-year-old in a blue dress, with yellow flowers, who had worked for 6 weeks on something she was proud of. I watched my daughter's face. I watched the radiance leave it. I watched the 9-year-old, who had not yet learned she needed armor, discover, in approximately 4 seconds, that she did. My name is Claudette Marsh. I am 41 years old, and what I did in the months that followed is not a story about cutting people off. Cutting people off is a minimum. What I did was something more precise, more total, more permanent. This is that story. I need you to understand my parents before I tell you what I did to them, not to build sympathy for them. I have no interest in building sympathy for people who laughed at a 9-year-old in a blue dress. But because understanding them is necessary for understanding the specific architecture of what I built in response. My parents, Harold and Iris Marsh, were people who had organized their entire social identity around a very specific performance of family: Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, the carefully curated image of a tight-knit family that was presented to their church community, their neighbors, and their social circle, with the consistency of people for whom the image was more important than the reality it was supposed to represent. They had a presence in their community. My father was a deacon at their church, a position he had held for 22 years, which gave him a specific kind of standing in the specific kind of community that assigns standing to such things. My mother ran the church's annual fundraising committee with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that visible community contribution was its own form of currency. They were known, respected, referred to by people who did not know them closely as pillars. This was the public version. The private version was the version I had grown up inside. A version where love was conditional on performance. Where worth was measured against a standard that was never quite stated clearly enough to meet. Where the laughter at a child's earnest effort was not an aberration, but an expression of something that had been operating quietly my entire life. I had survived my childhood by leaving it. I had not survived it in undoes, but I had built the over 20 years of adult life and 6 years of therapy and one very good marriage to a man named Daniel, who had the specific quality of seeing people clearly without needing to diminish what he saw, a life that was genuinely good. My daughter, Zoe, was the best thing in it, and they had laughed at her. I did not react in the room. This is important because my restraint in the room is sometimes the part people question when I tell this story. The wondering of why I didn't say something immediately, why I took Zoe's hand and said we needed to go and left without a confrontation. I left without a confrontation because I have learned over for 41 years that the most effective responses are never the immediate ones. The immediate responses satisfy the feeling. Deliberate responses change the situation. I wanted to change the situation. I took Zoe to the car. I buckled her in. She was very quiet in the way of a child who is processing something large and has not yet decided what it is. I drove 2 blocks. I pulled over. I turned to face her. Zoe, I said. They laughed, she said. Yes, I said. They did. Why? I thought about how to answer this with the honesty a 9-year-old deserved and the care a 9-year-old required. Because sometimes people laugh at things they don't understand, I said. And sometimes people laugh because laughing makes them feel bigger, and neither of those things has anything to do with your dancing. Your dancing was beautiful. It was 6 weeks of work, and every bit of it showed. She was quiet. Will we go back? She said. No, I said, ever. I looked at my daughter, 9 years old, blue dress with yellow flowers, the radiance that had left her face beginning slowly to come back, because she was sitting in a car with her mother, who was looking at her with the full attention of someone who considers her the most important thing in any room. Not unless you decide you want to, I said. And if you ever do, I'll be there. But we will never walk into a room where someone laughs at you like that again. Not if I can help it. She thought about this. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. I pulled back onto the road. I drove home, and that night, after Zoe was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with Daniel, and I told him what I was going to do. He listened to all of it. When I finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" "Everything," I said. You have it," he said. The first thing I did was the minimum. I called my mother the following morning and said, in precise and unemotional language, that what had happened the previous evening was the last time my parents would have access to my daughter, and that any future relationship between us would need to be built on an entirely different foundation than the one that had produced 4 adults laughing at a 9-year-old. My mother said they had only been teasing. I said the conversation was over and hung up. That was the minimum. The minimum took 4 minutes. What followed took 8 months. My parents' community standing was the architecture of their identity. This was not incidental, it was structural. Remove the standing, and you remove the thing that had held their self-image in place for 30 years. My father's deanship, my mother's committee work, the image of the tight-knit family presented to the neighbors and the church community and the social circle that had been the audience for the performance of their lives. The awe. I understood this because I had grown up inside it and had spent 20 years understanding exactly how it was built and what it was built from. It was built, in part, from silence. The silence of people who knew things that contradicted the image and had chosen, for various reasons of convenience or conflict avoidance or simple disinterest, not to say them. I had been one of those people. I was no longer one of those people. I want to be precise about what I did and what I did not do. I did not lie. Everything I said was accurate, true. Every account I gave was accurate. Every document I provided was real. I operated with the specific discipline of someone who understands that the truth, when it is complete and organized and delivered to the right people at the right time, does not require embellishment. What I did was end the silence. I had a conversation with my parents' pastor, a man named Reverend Cole, whom I had known peripherally my entire childhood, and who had always struck me as a person of genuine integrity, who would want to know certain things about the deacon he had trusted with his congregation for 22 years. I told him about the pattern of conditional love and public humiliation that had characterized my upbringing. I told him about the evening with Zoe. What had happened, what was said, who had laughed. I told him that I had documented similar incidents across my childhood that I was willing to share. He listened with the specific, serious attention of a man taking information seriously. I also had conversations, careful, factual, documented conversations, with 3 members of my mother's fundraising committee, who had, over the years, shared with me in private their own experiences of my mother's management style, which was less the warm community leadership the public version suggested, and more the specific, controlled manipulation of someone who used volunteer positions to accumulate social leverage. These women had their own things to say. I simply gave them a context in which to say them. The fundraising committee situation resolved itself without my further involvement. My mother's position on the committee did not survive the conversations that followed. There was a financial element. I mention it third because it was third in the sequence of what happened, not because it was third in importance. In some ways, it was the most concrete. My parents had, for several years, operated a small catering business that relied heavily on referrals from the church community and from the social network that my mother's committee work had built. It was not a large business, the but it was the supplementary income that had funded several things in their life that the image required: the house maintenance, the appearances, the specific standard of presentation that the performance of pillars demanded. I had referred them 2 clients in the previous year. The referrals had come from my professional network. I worked in corporate communications, and the corporate event space occasionally required catering vendors. And I had recommended my parents twice from a position of professional goodwill that I had extended despite everything, because Daniel had asked me to try. I withdrew the recommendations, not dramatically. I simply informed the relevant parties that I could no longer vouch for the vendor and that they should source alternatives. I also, in the course of conversations with 3 colleagues in the event planning space, provided an honest assessment of the quality and reliability of my parents' catering business based on first-hand knowledge. The assessment was accurate. It was not positive. The referral pipeline, which had been the primary source of new business for the catering operation, went quiet within 6 weeks. My father's deanship. This one took the longest because I was the most careful about it. I am aware that this part of the story is the part people debate most, and I want to address that directly. I did not engineer my father's removal from his position through false information or manipulation. I provided accurate information to a person who was entitled to have it. A person responsible for the spiritual welfare of a community that was operating under an incomplete understanding of the man in a position of trust within it. What Reverend Cole did with the information was his decision. What his conversation to 3 other families who had their own experiences of my father's deanship that had not previously been connected into a pattern produced was also not my decision. What happened was that a pattern became visible. The patterns that have been invisible. Because everyone involved has been keeping their portion of the pattern private, become visible. When someone decides that the privacy is no longer serving anyone. My father had been keeping his portion private for 22 years. So had the other families. I ended my portion of the privacy. The rest followed. My father resigned his deanship 4 months after my conversation with Reverend Cole. The resignation was described in the church's internal communication as voluntary. My parents called when they understood what was happening. Not at once, in stages, as each element resolved. With the specific desperate energy of people, watching an edifice come apart and calling the person they had, belatedly, understood was the architect of its deconstruction. My mother called first when the committee position ended. She said things I will not repeat verbatim because they were said from a place of panic rather than honesty, and repetition would not serve the story. I said, Zoe was 9 years old in a blue dress. She worked for 6 weeks. You laughed. My mother said, this is not proportionate. I said, you built your entire life on how things look to other people. I removed the ability for them to look the way you needed them to. That seems proportionate to me. She had no response to this. My father called when the deanship ended. He was quieter than my mother. My father had always been quieter, the specific quiet of someone who understood, on some level, that the thing that had happened was connected to things he had done and had not before now been required to account for. Claudette, he said. Dad, I said. Was this necessary? He said. I thought about Zoe's face, the radiance leaving it. The 4 seconds. Yes, I said. We are your parents, he said. You were her grandparents, I said. That was the more important thing, and you used it to laugh at a 9-year-old in a blue dress. A silence. I want to ask you something, I said. And I want an honest answer, okay, he said. When I was 7, I said. The recital. Do you remember? A pause. Yes, he said. What did you do? The V. The silence that followed was the most honest thing my father said in that entire conversation. I laughed, he said. Yes, I said. You did, and now you've done it to her. He said nothing. Zoe is going to be fine, I said. She has two parents who see her clearly and a school that understands her, and a life that does not require your approval to be whole. She is going to be completely fine. I paused. The pattern ends with me. That's all this was. The pattern ends with me. Zoe is 11 now. She started taking dance classes 4 months after the evening with the blue dress. Her own decision, is stated to me one morning at breakfast, with the matter-of-fact tone she uses for things she has decided are settled. I want to take actual lessons, she said, not just practice at home. Okay, I said, because I want to be better, she said, not because of them, because I want to. That's the only reason worth having, I said. She nodded. She went back to her cereal. She has performed 3 times at the dance school's recital events. The air. I have been in the front row each time. Daniel has been beside me. The radiance, when she finishes and stands with her arms out, is exactly what it was in the living room in the blue dress. Exactly that, undimmed, because she has been in rooms since then that reflected it back correctly. My parents sent a card at Christmas. I did not open it, not from ongoing anger. The anger had resolved months before the card arrived. From the specific clarity of someone who has completed a thing and does not need to reopen it. The card sits in a drawer in my office. Zoe does not know it exists. She does not need to. Daniel asked me, on a quiet evening 6 months after everything had resolved, whether I had any regret. I thought about it seriously. About Zoe? I said. No, not for a single moment. About your parents? I thought about my father on the phone, the recital he remembered. The honest silence before he confirmed what I already knew. I regret that it was necessary, I said. I don't regret that I did it. There's a difference, he said. Yes, I said. There is. He was quiet for a moment. You protected her, he said. I protected her, I said, and I ended something that had been running for 40 years and would have run for 40 more if I hadn't stopped it. I paused. Zoe will never stand in a room wondering if the people who are supposed to love her are about to laugh. Not because of me, because I decided that my childhood was the last generation of that particular inheritance. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, She's lucky. She's going to be fine, I said. That was the whole point. Before you go, I need your honest answer in the comments right now. Was Claudette right to go beyond cutting them off? Or did she cross a line that parents and children should never cross? This question divides every room I bring it into, and I genuinely want to know where you stand. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reached something real in you, if you have ever watched someone you love be made small by the people who were supposed to make them feel large, hit that like button so this story finds the people who need it today. Share it with every parent who has ever stood between their child and a room that didn't deserve them. And if you believe that the most important thing a parent can do is end the inheritance of harm, subscribe. Because every week this channel brings you the stories of people who decided the pattern ended with them. You do not want to miss what is coming. For every parent who has sat in the front row of a dance recital and felt the specific fullness of watching someone you love perform without fear, Audible has a first month completely free. There are stories in that app about exactly this kind of love, the kind that protects without asking permission. The link is in the description. It is there for you.